On behalf of all at Open, it is a very proud privilege. To have the finance minister of the country is always a privilege. To have him immediately after the budget for the first interaction with corporate India is an even greater privilege. I'm sure all of you agree that it's a historic budget. Probably, or actually not probably, the best budget that independent India has seen. There has been a transformative shift in governance. It's gone from discretion-based to policy-based, from an informal system to a formal system, from a cash-based system to a cashless system. You have created a new normal that all of us regard, respect, and salute. The emphasis on transparency, the focus on agriculture, infrastructure, manufacturing, ease of doing business, reduction of red tapeism, in each of the measures that are outlined in the budget, your thought leadership is apparent. We can only thank you for an exceptional budget. You have been inspirational. You have been bold. You have been visionary. In short, you have been simply outstanding. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Arun Jaitley.
Traditionally, in India, the headlines following the budget was essentially as to what will cost more and what will cost less. Because it was only tinkering with the excise duties, the customs duties. And there was very little emphasis on policy. I think emphasis on policy started in 1991. And that was a shift for the better. We were concerned this year on account of various global factors, domestic factors, that this had to be a spend more and not a save more budget. For the reason that when private investment is slow, in order to even spur private investment, the other investments must pick up. And therefore, various segments of the industry itself have to pick up. And when you have to spend more, where do you spend more? So the chosen areas were absolutely clear. You resist the temptation of increasing the various schemes and the yojanas. And I think we rightly chose agricultural sector and rural India as one segment. The second important area was to continue to support the social sector areas. So women and child health programs, etc. And there's a huge amount of allocations across ministries which has been made in the social sector areas. It's increased. Nowhere has it been cut in any way. The third important area, of course, which is inevitable, is defense, which takes a very large amount. Secondly, as far as taxation is concerned, I think the approach broadly was to remove complications wherever they existed, to certainly reward the honest and the compliant. And now that both carrot and stick are working as a part of our policy as regards the non-compliant are concerned, once we are able to bring in the non-compliant into the tax net, then the burden which the compliant used to bear of the non-compliant share also has to relatively come down. So we've chosen two sectors, the individual taxpayer. The smaller one gets percentage-wise a higher benefit, but almost everybody gets some element of benefit. This is one of the only budgets where taxes have actually been reduced rather than increased. And of course, keeping my commitment for a roadmap on corporate tax, I think I chose not MSME, but MSME plus, because 50 crores is MSME plus for that purpose, so that they give a lesser rate so that they have more investable surplus, they are more competitive. I think the subject of political funding, and that's the last point I'll make in the opening comment, was something which has been very close personally to my heart. And therefore, we've devised this new system. And under this new system, there'll be a scheme which will be prepared by the government. I think ideally, people should give by check. There should be, political parties will have to now follow a discipline. Election Commission suggested the cash donation must be capped at rupees 2,000. We accepted the suggestion. And I'd consulted a lot of people. And we devised this method that clean money coming through electoral bonds. And your condition of exemption, both to the donor and the donee, is provided this rule is followed. And if a party breaks this rule, then it stands the risk of losing its tax exemption. So its entire donation will be taxed as income in its hand. So that's the way of enforcing it. I think it's an experiment which we are trying. I hope it does succeed. That's all I had to say in the opening.
So I'm going to take the privilege of asking the first question, if I may. The country has been looking for growth, which you've been providing, and employment, which you've been providing. Manufacturing is an important sector, and you've been talking about investments in the manufacturing sector. So how do you propose to actually have a major trigger for promoting investment and creation of employment through manufacturing?
You see, the government has done everything under the sun which was possible to do it. The rest is your job. And in fact, India should not feel let down by your fraternity, because the foreign investors are investing, the government is investing, the state governments are doing their bit, and therefore we are now waiting for the private sector to act. Now, I do realize the problem with the private sector investment. And the problem with the private sector investment broadly is that a large number had overstretched itself. And therefore, in terms of global slowdown, inadequacy of global demand, they are feeling the pressures. And therefore, it's linked to a larger situation, particularly the problem in a few sectors itself. It's a gradual process. I think in terms of policy, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of the ecosystem and environment, we are ready. As the demand picks up, and that's each one of our policies is really intended in that direction, I'm sure the private sector itself would come back to its original spirit.
I'm sure, sir, the private sector will respond and respond very strongly. Can I shift towards the president of CII, Naushad Forbes?
Finance Minister, first of all, our compliments on an excellent budget. We were impressed with the focus on fiscal consolidation, first and foremost, and then so many valuable elements, the investment in the rural sector, the investment in infrastructure, which will crowd in private investment and which will will create demand in itself. The courageous decision to abolish the Foreign Investment Promotion Board, which is an institution that has outlived its time. One area that we feel was not addressed in the budget, and obviously one budget can't address every area, but maybe future budgets could look at, is how do we create the right innovative economy of the future for the country? How do we get Indian industry to focus much more on R&D? The primary responsibility is ours in industry. I agree with you 100%, but there are many parts of the world where the government supports industry investment in R&D and deepening of technical proprietary capabilities in industry. Second, there's a very particular role that the state plays in enhancing the research ecosystem, which is to fund most of the research that's done within the higher education sector. And this is done around the world. We need to begin that process of moving public research funding from autonomous government laboratories to the higher education system. And it could be a very welcome change in our overall trajectory as a country.
Well, Naushad, I take your suggestion in the right earnest. Given the kind of resources we have, hopefully if they do improve in years to come, I think it's a very welcome suggestion to be on the table itself. On two other points that you made, one was the FRBM and the FIPB. On FIPB, let me tell you, it's an institution which has now been, it's fulfilled a purpose. Today, 90% of the FDI we get into India is through the automatic route. And the 10% which comes through the FIPB additionally also requires some regulation by the parent ministry. So the investor has to go through the same set of check twice over. On the FRBM, originally what was being targeted was to bring down 3.5 to 3% within a year. The encasing committee has also made a recommendation to bring it to 3 and then pause for 3 years. Now, in the year of a global slowdown, in the year where you need more to spend more, given the domestic and the international factors, a 0.5 reduction would have actually meant spending much less. And therefore, I wanted to keep, there were two views that came in the committee. One was to have a 3-year pause and then again go down. The other was a gradual glide path. That was Arvind Subramaniam's view. And hopefully, this year, I have kept the revenue buoyancy at 12%. Last 2 years, my buoyancy has been 17%. So 12% is extremely modest. And to achieve 3.2 is reasonably possible. And I think keeping that fiscal consolidation in mind and the needs of the current economy, I think a balancing act required to be done.
After the audacious demonetization, I expected a far more audacious budget, I might say. And I'd like to ask you, why not? And a couple of things I'd like to comment on. Not that it's not a good budget, it's a good budget. But I think that some of the things which could have been more radical is to address subsidies in fertilizer and food. Even the 2,000 rupee, which you were talking about just now, about election funding in cash, I think BJP claims a membership of 10 crores, 8 crores of members, put 2,000 each in their names, and you can do the maths, right? Mrs. Mayawati has done the same thing in her disproportionate case also. She said she got donations from all small donations. So I think there are a lot of loopholes in that. I also feel that you're not aggressive enough in terms of your PSU disinvestments. And my other point, which I'd like to make generally, is the fact that we haven't addressed the fact that the delivery systems are so leaky. And we keep shoving money down in so many schemes. I think over the years, it's so many budgets that every year is the same story. So not enough to be addressed to fix the leaky delivery system.
As far as electoral funding is concerned, except for what we did during Mr. Vajpayee's government that gave these tax exemptions, etc., hoping that it will move out, no serious steps have ever been taken by any government. This is a big, big step. And the 2,000 rupee in cash as the upper limit and the breach inviting consequences is a recommendation of the Election Commission. Now, if somebody misuses it, as you mentioned, then the scheme which I have outlined, it's going to invite onerous consequences. Now, it's true this government doesn't make a song and dance about disinvestment. I fix a target in every budget. Now, the maximum noise was made during Mr. Vajpayee's government. In 5 years, we achieved a disinvestment total of 27,000 crores. This year, I'm going to touch 45,000 in 1 year. Now, there's no point stepping on every shoe and foot in the town, costing my party millions of votes in order to get a brownie point from you that you've made a lot of noise about disinvestment. So let's not be under any wrong illusion just because we don't, disinvestment is just one agenda, that there is no disinvestment or we are not being ambitious enough. This year, one of the factors which I wonder whether you noticed in the budget, I have announced the listing of a large number of PSUs onto the stock exchange. So PSUs which are not listed will now be going into the stock exchange. And a number of them, once they go into the stock exchange, again will necessarily entail 26% divestment of each one of them. And some of them are huge. As far as the subsidies and the delivery system is concerned, you see, if GST is an important tax reform, if demonetization, with all its consequences, I think was a tectonic reform that we did. It's going to change the way of life, the way we spend, and the way we live. I think the third big change in that category is the jam trinity. This whole body of data that you have in the Janadhan account, in the Aadhaar system and the mobile system, for the first time you have in India, in the last 2 to 3 years, rationalization of subsidies which is taking place. Petroleum has got completely targeted. The LPG has got completely targeted. Today you have dozens of these subsidies which are going directly into the bank accounts, and therefore the rich are now disentitled from it. So each one of these subsidies, the whole process of rationalization and experimentation is there, and some of them have been achieved and some is work in progress.
Can I shift to the president of IMA, Sunil Munjal?
Budgets usually cover many areas, but this time it came with specific programs and actual funding behind this. For us as a nation for the next 25 years, our key focus has got to be creating economic opportunities and jobs. We cannot get away from that. In addition to that, can we also focus on direct economic opportunities? One of the areas which is prevalent across the country is the crafts in the rural areas specifically. So if we can figure out a way, since we're talking of skills, upgradation, innovation, if we can figure out a way to connect them to markets and some input, either in design, etc., this has the potential to create well over 100 million jobs for India, or economic opportunities, because many of them are entrepreneurs by themselves. The two discussions which came up the day before the budget, PARA and UBI, two discussions. Any thoughts on this? Can the UBI subsume the existing subsidies as you've done in GST in case of taxes and be available only to a targeted segment to bring down your overall spend and yet be more effective?
Well, the first part, I take the suggestion. On the second part on UBI, you see, an economic survey is a document which is prepared by the chief economic advisor. The political establishment in the government and the finance ministry maintains an arm's length distance from it. He also floats ideas for the future. And I think Arvind Subramaniam in last year's economic survey, probably one of the most outstanding chapters was the subsidies for the rich. Now, in this year's budget, I think the big idea he floated for a discussion on the table, this is not for an immediate implementation this year, is the universal basic income. And the idea, as I understand, is that today you have an unstructured list of subsidies, untargeted. For instance, if you or I traveled by a train, our travel is being subsidized. Now, are you entitled to that subsidy? And therefore, this being unstructured and untargeted, why should the center and the state government, all the subsidies that we are giving, not pull them into one, pick up the 30-35% most vulnerable sections of India, and give them a check each in their bank account through the DBT at the beginning of every month. Whatever else he earns, whether from Manrega or from unorganized sector or organized sector, is over and above that, so that you can lift people out of poverty. But to implement that idea, which he has put on the table, I think the level of Indian politics has to mature. That this UBI will then be a substitute for the existing lot of subsidies being given by the center and the states. Indian politics should not compel a debate to say, well, you're already giving something, give this in addition. And that is something that the budget can't afford.
From the healthcare sector, Shobhana Kamaneni.
One thing that I'd like to actually ask as a pointed question is that you've given all these allocations to different, under different headings, and over the years that we've seen that many of these don't get spent fully. But what we're saying is that the efficiency of the spending, if that doesn't happen, the consequences are on the pushing up of the industry. That's one. But coming to the healthcare sector, I think that every year that you give a little bit, but 1 year I'd really like to see a fantastic focus on healthcare and talking about NCDs and how we can do it. I think that I cannot finish without congratulating you that you did do something for women in your budget, and you continue to do it among the highest allocation. But we do need some more, because if you see the power, the power of parity, there's an index. India is among the poorest in the world. You know that it's 1:9. World average is 1:3. So I'll end there.
I'll take the suggestion that you've made, but on this non-spending, let me tell you, that is a performance-related issue. And in this government, the layer of accountability of every ministry to the Prime Minister and his office is so high that non-spending is not an issue. As on the 1st of January this year, 81% of this year's allocations had been spent. But last year we ended up spending more than what we provided for. So the revised estimates were higher than the budget estimates. This year the revised estimates are going to be much higher than the budget estimates. So as I speak to you just now, I don't see a single ministry in the present government where I am expecting any form of budgetary saving, as we call them, that the amount which they have not spent.
I think I'd request all of you to join me in thanking our Honorable Finance Minister. Clearly, the best Finance Minister India has seen, and he's presented the best budget India has seen.